By the end of this video, your users and agents will sync automatically from EntraID. They'll log in via SSO, and new starters will gain access to Halo with minimal efforts and via automations if you'd like as well. So we'll be covering importing users and agents from your tenant into Halo, assigning them to teams, approver roles, end user roles as well. We'll talk about setting up recurring syncs, so onboarding and offboarding just works. Configuring SSO so everyone logs in with their credentials, Microsoft credentials, as well as managing Halo licenses directly from Entra Group membership. Just bear in mind, in a typical environment, this usually takes about 15 minutes, and more often than not, most admins can complete this without any assistance at all. I want to preface this guide by noting that these EntraID configurations are just typical practice and are often suitable and secure and approved by the majority of clients. However, your organization's IT security or infrastructure policies may require some modifications to be made. Okay, so from our agent app, we'll jump into the configuration area down the bottom left, and I find it easiest to do a search for EntraID. In a separate window, I like to open up the Azure portal, portal.azure.com, and we'll jump into Microsoft EntraID. And from this screen, unless Microsoft changes the UI again, we can jump into our app registrations on the left side pane. And we'll go ahead and hit new registration at the top. So we'll jump back to Halo, and firstly, we're actually going to jump into the single sign-on tab, and we can actually pull one of the redirect URIs we'd need for our SSO to work. So go ahead, copy that to the clipboard, and create our app registration. User, agent, provisioning. Single tenant is applicable in most situations. The redirect URI, we're going to set web as the platform, and we can now pop in that SSO URI. We'll hit register and jump back to our Halo screen. Now we'll jump into our agent/user imports, add edit tenants, and create a new record here. We'll give this an internal name. Two options for our authentication method. We have the client credentials. This is simply to set up. It doesn't require any additional redirect URIs, and it's what I'd recommend for most environments. You also have the authorization code, which requires an additional redirect URI, and generally would use this if your security team requires delegated permissions to be used. But in most cases, client credentials is perfectly fine, and the credential type will be client secret. We can now see the API permissions needed for our registration. These are going to be application permissions, and only these two are required. We have some optional permissions, which we'll skip out for the moment, and these are going to be used for our advanced features in the integration, things like reading licenses from users, as well as reading login data from users. Okay, we'll jump back to our app registration and jump into Manage, API Permissions. We can remove the default user.read permission by clicking the three dots, remove permission, yes, remove. And now we can add our permissions that we require. Microsoft Graph, application permissions, user.read.all and group.read.all. Note that you can actually select multiple permissions here without having to add them each time. So we'll add both of those permissions, and it's important to grant the admin consent for these permissions. We'll jump into our authentication tab. We can see the redirect URI that we added before, but we also need to jump into the settings tab and enable these two checkboxes. And finally, we'll jump into the certificates and secrets tab and generate a client secret for our app registration. Be sure to save the value immediately, store it in your clipboard or in a secure space. Once we navigate away from the screen, the value will disappear. It's the value that we want to apply into our configuration within Halo, not the client secret ID. So now that I've got the value in my clipboard, I'll actually jump back to Halo, pop it straight in there, and now we just need to populate our tenant ID and app ID. I can populate those by jumping into the Overview tab, and I can see my client ID, my application ID, and my directory or tenant ID. We'll go ahead and hit save and authorize application. We've now connected Halo to our EntraID application. At this point, we will just copy the tenant ID and app ID into the SSO config. So if I go back a level into the single sign-on tab, we have our tenant ID and app ID fields. I'll grab the application ID first and the tenant ID. Single tenant is correct. Generally, federated domain does not need to be populated, so we'll just go ahead and hit published. There's a few checkboxes we'd almost always recommend enabling on this page. That's going to be the automatic redirection of agents and users to Azure without showing them the Halo ITSM login screen. Just note you can reach that screen by using your URL and then appending the no SSO equals true parameter. We also typically recommend enabling single logout, which will log them out of any other SSO authenticated applications. We'll jump back into our agent users imports, add edit tenants, and continue configuring our integration here. First thing we'll do is jump into the field mappings tab. Most of the field mappings you'll ever need are going to automatically be populated, but we can of course add additional mappings if we require them. We can map from most of the out-of-the-box mappings in Entra. We can also map extension attributes, and we can also map custom attributes as well. The site/agents mappings tab, this is where you essentially tell Halo which groups or subsets of your tenant you want to import into Halo. It's essentially the front door, and anything you want to assign to a role later must come through here first. Because of that, typically would want to map a licensed agent group, everyone who will be working on tickets within Halo, an admin group, as well as groups for each of our teams as well. To configure those groups, that'll be done from Microsoft EntraID. We'll navigate into EntraID and have a quick look at an example group. We'll go back to Home, EntraID, Groups. We can see my groups. I'll navigate into all groups, and I have an existing group for the Halo ITSM admins. Currently, this group just has a single member, which is myself. The group type we'd typically use is going to be a security group. So I've created 3 groups: Halo admins, Halo licensed agents, as well as our Halo first line support. And just note that users may appear in more than one group, and in this case, I'm a licensed agent. I'll be working on tickets. I'm also going to be an admin within Halo, and I want to be a part of the first line support team. Typically, we'd have a few additional groups for our additional teams, such as second line support, business applications, infrastructure, facilities, etc. Now that I have my groups, we'll jump back into Halo, and within the site/agent mappings tab, we'll add an entry to our mapping table. With the way that we're going to structure this, we only need a single mapping for our agents on this screen. We'll set the site to agents. Sequence can be 1, it doesn't matter with the way we're setting this up. And this will be for our licensed agents. The role, I'm going to assign them to the ID agent role. This is an out-of-the-box role that we're going to use to provide all agents with a basic level of access to the system. The Azure group name, I'll copy that across. Just making sure to not copy across any spaces. And we'll go ahead and import agent profiles. We'll hit save, and we can actually jump to the imports tab, import agents, to double check that Halo is connected properly and that it's reading the agents in that group, which in this case it absolutely is. Now that we've got our mapping in place, we can jump to our advanced tab. And this is where we can map specific groups to specific Halo roles for granular role-based access control. Within this first set of tables, agent and role mappings, we're going to map our service desk group to the service desk role, and we're also going to map our admin group to the admin role. Before we can map our groups, our Entra groups to our roles, we'll need to set up the roles. So I've just opened up a new tab, config, teams and agents, agent roles. There's a bunch of out-of-the-box roles, and we'll go ahead and delete most of those a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to create a new role for each of my teams. The teams I have in the system we can find within the teams area, and at the moment, I only really care too much about my service desk team. So I'm going to create a role, typically just with the same name, service desk. We won't do anything to this role except within the departments and teams tab, we're going to say that anyone with this role is going to be assigned to the service desk team. And we can also say anyone with this role is also going to have visibility over business applications and infrastructure. Later on, we'll have the ability to provide extra access to anyone with this role, and the same thing for all the additional roles that we need to configure within the tool. But we'll jump back now to the EntraID configuration, provide in my service desk group, and map that through to the service desk role. We can do the same thing for the admin group. And we'll go ahead and hit save. From here, to double check that the mappings are working as expected, I'm going to do another test import. I'll first jump into Teams and Agents, just have a look at my record and see what roles I currently have. Currently, I've only got the Halo ITSM admin, so I expect to also be assigned the service desk role as well as the IT agent role. Imports, import agents, start. Perfect. So we can see now my record has also been assigned the IT agent and service desk role. I usually like to take this opportunity to rename the IT agent role to something more appropriate. We'll jump to IT agent just in case we expand beyond IT, and we can call this standard access instead, because this will be providing agents with a standard level of access, which we can control. Now that we've imported our agents into the system, they've been linked to their EntraID unique IDs, we can actually test our SSO. To do that, we'll recommend just opening up an incognito window and attempting to log into your instance URL, and it should automatically redirect you into Halo. Usually, if there's any issues, the error message will be quite descriptive. The most common errors we see will be a missing redirect URI, or perhaps within the app registration authentication tab, the 2 checkboxes under settings were not enabled. Now that it's all configured, we'll talk a little bit about what happens on Monday morning when something changes. The first example being onboarding of a brand new finance team. So here's the typical workflow. We would create a new group within our EntraID. Would name that group something like Halo ITSM Finance. In the role, would name that something like Finance. Don't forget, within the agent role we create, we'll need to say that anyone with this role is going to be added into the finance team. And in this case, we're also going to say anyone with this role cannot see the tickets of any other teams, so we'll simply leave that blank. We could give the finance team members some additional access if needed. We would create our team as well. In this case, we have an existing team called Payroll, so I'm going to simply just rename this to Finance, make sure that they're enabled. From there, we'll jump into our EntraID integration, and we need to map that group to that role. Add edit tenants, edit our existing tenant, advanced tab, add a new record here, provide the name of our finance EntraID group, and then map that to our role. This is to say anyone within this EntraID group is going to be mapped to this role, and this role is going to provide them access to the finance team. And on our next sync, we'll automatically pick up those finance agents and they'll be mapped through to their team. We can manually sync as well from within our imports tab in case we need this to be done ASAP. So next up, we'll do our user mappings, and for our end users, we've got a little bit of flexibility here depending on your exact setup. The first question is going to be, do we have more than one site that we need to map to, or just a single site? Sites within Halo allow us to have users and assets mapped to them. This can be useful for role-based access control, providing different visibility to site managers as an example, reporting based on sites as well. So typically sites are going to be different geographical locations. They don't always have to be, but more often than not, it's going to be different offices where users or assets will live. Let's assume for the moment that we only have a single site. To edit our sites, we can jump into the users area. This will sometimes be referred to as organizations, CRM, clients, but in my case, it's called users. We can jump into sites. Out of the box, you'll have 3 different sites, main, site 1, and site 2. You can simply delete site 1 and site 2, and sometimes you'll have to delete the assets that are at those sites or any tickets as well. Now that I have my main site set up, we'll hit edit, add, map to an existing site, correct? We're going to map to our main head office site. Sequence is not going to be important for us. We can set this as 1. This is going to be for our end users. We don't need to set a role. If we've got an existing group, we can make use of that group and only have Halo inspect members within that group. Otherwise, we can simply use Halo filters to filter out any service accounts or admin accounts from our import as well. Typically, we'd make use of filters such as mail is not null, perhaps surname is not null as well. Once we've applied all the filters we need to filter out most of our, if not all of our service accounts before importing any users or agents, if you already have users or agents in the system that were manually created or created from some other identity integration or via CSV import, just make sure to set the user matching or agent matching fields as well so that we don't create duplicate records and instead we match on some attribute. We'll go ahead and hit save, import users. We should see some end users now. Perfect. Hit start, and we can now go back into our CRM and make sure that we can see those users within the system, which we can. Let's assume now that we have more than one site within Halo. And in this case, we've got two main ways of mapping our users to their different sites. We can use the same method as before, map to an existing site, go through each site one by one, starting with perhaps our main Brisbane site, Brisbane users, specify a group, such as a Brisbane users group in EntraID, and then import users and have them assigned to that group. We could also make use of filters here, and oftentimes we'll make use of something like the office location is equal to Brisbane as an example. We can add as many rows to this table as we need so that we can account for all of our different sites within the system. Especially where we have many different sites, it's more effective for us to do this dynamically based on an EntraID field. However, that does rely on the data within EntraID being consistent and accurate. For instance, if you've got 3 different users that are at Brisbane, but they all have slightly different formatting, Brisbane, BNE, Brisbane, Queensland, Halo won't know to assign those to a single site. So if the data is inconsistent, we'd usually take this as an opportunity to go through your EntraID data and clean up as much as possible. If that's not feasible at the moment, this method from before, we simply need to create additional rows with filters to account for each of those different variations of our spelling. But if the data is consistent, we can actually use the other option within our site mapping type, which is mapping to an existing client, or site in this case, based on an Azure field. If we hit that, it looks similar, but we have a new field. What we're saying is we want to map, in this case, to our Meridian Group client. The field that we're going to look at is going to be, in this case, office location. This is going to be for all end users. We could use a group, but we don't have to. Instead, it's going to look at the office location and create a site for each unique office location. So long as the data is accurate within Entra, Halo will know to create all the appropriate groups, and users will automatically be moved to those groups. Once you have your user mappings, back into imports, import users, and just ensure that we can see the users, we'll go ahead and hit start, and our users should automatically be allocated to their respective sites. One thing to note with user records, we cannot bulk delete them from the UI. If you ever run into that, just send me a message. We do have scripts to be able to bulk delete them. You do have the option to make them inactive, but it does require using the API to bulk delete users. Within the new user onboarding tab, we have the ability for a ticket template, which is to say a ticket with either pre-filled information, to-do list, or child tasks, or a combination of them all to be created anytime a new user is provisioned within Halo. We simply need to set the template we'd like to use, set who the end user for that ticket should be, and then we can actually map data from that user's record in Entra through to fields on that ticket as well. Within the Imports tab, we'd typically recommend enabling the user agent status being equal to the account enabled property. That way, if they're disabled in Entra, they will be disabled and removed of their license and access from Halo as well. We typically would not recommend reassigning to unassigned if the agent's made inactive, because we'll lose who the original ticket owner was. It won't be removed necessarily from the ticket's audit log, but the ticket will obviously be moved from their allocation to the unassigned or general queue. The Halo integrator by default is going to be hosted by Halo on a daily basis. We can have the specific time it's run modified. And if we do require it to be run more frequently, we also can download a local version of the integrator. You will just have that set up on a local server or VM, and we set that up on a Windows scheduled task. We can have that run as frequently or infrequently as needed. In the case that we have typically more than about 5,000 users, or we need to run this sync quite frequently, we can enable the Azure deltas as well. This is going to tell Halo to not do a full resync of every single user and agent each time. It will only monitor for changes. The fastest method to use in this case is going to be only listening for system field and mapped field changes, and would still want to deactivate users and agents in Halo if a delete event is received, or sometimes if any update is received and the user no longer is part of a site mapping. Within the miscellaneous tab, there's a very useful checkbox here which allows groups to be added as ticket followers. And what this means is our different groups such as admins, first line support, licensed agents can now be bulk added as ticket followers. This means if we ever needed to provide visibility of a ticket to an entire team, or to all of our admins, or to every agent in the system, we can do it by simply assigning a single group follower rather than manually specifying multiple followers. There are two grayed out features within this integration, the license subscription management, as well as the presence notification. Both of those will be enabled based on the additional permissions being granted. We don't often see those configured in an ITSM space. The license management will actually allow allocation of licenses from Halo back into Entra. So instead of managing license allocation in Entra, you could manage it from within Halo. And it's useful if your service desk needs to provision access without ever touching Azure. Their presence notifications works with the Microsoft Teams native Halo integration, and once enabled, you can define rules that will update an agent's Halo status based on their Microsoft Teams availability and activity. There's also an option to only apply the rule when the technician is currently online in Halo. And that's it. Your users and agents are now syncing, SSOs live, and your day 2 workflows are all ready to go. A couple of notes: if you're manually assigning roles to someone in Halo, that does override the automation during the sync, and the sync will not revert it. You can also check config and advanced settings for options around remembering agent and user logins and bypassing 2FA for SSO users. If you hit any issues, I've linked the documentation in the description. Most common errors come from the Graph API rather than Halo, so they're usually down to Azure permission configurations, and a quick search often sorts them out.